Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV. HFO-TV is co-sponsored by the construction, repair, and restoration firm J.R. Johnson, the real estate law firm Baljanik LLP, the tax deferral accommodator Butler Exchange Group, the mortgage banking firm Gantry Incorporated, and forensic building consultants providing building structural science services.
Welcome back to HFO TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Here today with us, we've got Brett Waller, Director of Government Affairs with the Washington Multifamily Housing Association. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things they've seen in Washington regarding legislative updates. I know we have these periodically through the year, so again, it's great to get Brett in here to give us a rundown of what's happened, what's kind of on the horizon. Again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're doing this remotely. That's why we don't have masks on. We're not sitting in the same room, so we're trying to be as safe as we can, and I hope everybody survived this winter storm that we've been getting hit with. So again, thanks, Brett, for taking the time to sit down with us and our audience.
Yeah, no problem.
Maybe we can kind of jump, Oregon's had its fair share of legislative things. There's a landlord fund now. We've both been dealing with, I think the whole West Coast with eviction moratoriums and nationally as well. Maybe give a little update as to kind of what's happened, in this most recent kind of legislative session in terms of the effect on multifamily, and then we can kind of dig a little deeper in some of these topics.
Yeah, I mean, housing is certainly a priority this year, and making sure that Washingtonians, particularly lower income Washingtonians who are more likely to rent, remain stable, remain housed, and have the resources available to them. And so that's really been the focus of the legislative session, along with addressing projected revenue shortfalls, and continuing to address some of the other significant public policy issues that affect the state, including homelessness and mental health issues, education, and other significant problems that are occurring within our state.
And then your group is, similar, I think, to the one up here. It's multifamily owners, management companies, or kind of the members of. Is it single family as well, or is it more of the larger kind of ownership entities?
So we have a broad mix of members. However, but primarily we do represent larger property managers and owners in the state. We have about 270,000 units under our membership. In about 1,700, a little more than 1,700 properties.
So and I'm assuming the largest kind of group within the state of Washington.
Yeah, we represent about 43% of the entire rental market.
Okay. So what's I think nationally we're seeing this, like I said, national eviction moratoriums, ways to try to deal with, keeping people in their homes, but then the offset is, who's going to pay for this or not pay, or things like that. I mean, what do you, in Oregon, a lot of the policy is driven from Portland. That we've seen down in Salem. I think just the way our state, the way it's dispersed with the population. I think Portland is a larger population center in terms of relation to the rest of the state. So a lot of the policies are pushing through. Some of the things we've tried to educate all around is just the unintended consequences, the negative effects of some of these policies and what that's going to do long term, and who are you really trying to help. Kind of what's the kind of landscape in Washington, and what do you see happening?
Well, we definitely believe that kind of what happens in Seattle does trickle down in a similar way to what happens in Portland does kind of expand to the state. But certainly Seattle and the state do share some differences. I mean, our state is pretty diverse in its political leanings, and there are different parts of the state. The reality is that across the entire United States, housing is becoming a priority simply because the cost to provide housing is becoming so high, but the incomes of those people who are renting or owning are not matching what it's costing to build and operate housing. And so that in and of itself creates this priority and this intense focus on particularly rental housing, given that so many people are choosing or have no option but to rent.
So in terms of rental assistance, let's talk about that first. I mean, there's been, in all municipalities, there was some COVID money that got released to, federally to the states and to the county. Then I think each, it was kind of different how each one kind of put it out. What are you guys seeing in Washington, and what are you looking at moving forward in terms of what are the rental assistance programs that are in place or what's on the horizon?
Yeah, so the governor delivered $110 million in rental assistance in the second half of 2020. That money has been spent. We believe, based upon some counties reporting, that paid for about, the average tenant was behind about 2.5 months, a little more than 2.5 months, and which is actually a good thing to see that tenants are only behind, 2 to 3 months in rent. Just last week, he announced an additional $43.5 million of state funding towards rental assistance. So that'll be distributed through the same program and method as the 100 million or 110 million. And then Congress, as part of their Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed in December, that provided a little more than 500 million to the state for rental assistance. About 365 million of that went directly to the state, and the balance went to some smaller jurisdictions through a direct allocation. That money is sitting, the states have received that money, and it will be distributed hopefully beginning in early March. The state and all other states, frankly, are waiting for the final FAQ to come from the Department of Treasury in order to begin implementing and distributing that money.
The rental assistance that was given in the mid-year last year, I mean, how was the mechanism of that getting out to, tenants and to property owners? I mean, I know we've had, just looking at it in Oregon, there were some kind of snags in some of the bigger municipalities about getting that out, who to get it out to, who qualifies, who doesn't. We have a rental, our state just passed in the short session in December, a landlord fund or tenant obligation fund of 150 million with maybe an additional 50, but there's this uneasiness about, trying to qualify who's going to get it. If you're a larger property owner, your tenant's not going to qualify if you own a certain number of units. What are they doing in Washington, or how did they do that? And are they using that same mechanism for this next batch to go out? Will it just, add kind of refunding it and sending it back out?
Broadly, the problem is that there's just not enough rental assistance to cover the need. We estimate that there's about $1 billion in rental assistance or in rent that's owing from the beginning of the pandemic. And we've seen now we'll be about halfway through that rental assistance. For the state money, the way it was allocated, it went to the counties, and then the counties had the opportunity to kind of do what they wanted to do with it. I know that in King County, they targeted the areas with the highest unemployment rate and the highest COVID infection rate to begin with, and they prioritized those areas, and then kind of opened it up to a broader swath of tenants and property owners. I think that they'll do something similar to that in the next. There's a lot of focus on equity and making sure that the money is provided into the community equitably, and that folks who are historically and disproportionately affected by policies that and access to rental assistance, access to other resources, make sure that they do have some priority access to getting that rental assistance first, before really making it kind of an open for all access.
Yeah, now in part of that, is there a forgiveness component? So like the fund that's down here, to get rental assistance, to the property owner, they're supposed to forgive 20% of what's owed. Was there a caveat on that, or was the first one just trying to get it out to tenants right away?
The first one did have some caveats, and most of the jurisdictions, the local grantees did enact some or create some additional policies to prevent evictions and other, perceived instability challenges. Under the state program, you could get up to fair market value or contract rent, whatever is highest. Under the Treasury, the proposal is that you would be able to receive up to 150% of fair market value. That's actually really good. So in King County, for example, that's about $2,600 for a one-bedroom apartment, a little bit more than $2,600 for a one-bedroom apartment. So it actually works out that should cover a lot of the market and the differences in the market.
And are they paying back rent as well, or is it just rent moving forward?
The state program really only paid back rent to get someone current. They were able to pay up to 6 months. The federal program will be able to pay up to 12 months. and typically 9 months of back rent and up to 3 months moving forward.
And was your membership, partaking in that? Was there a kind of a good high percentage of buy-in on that? Or I probably would depend on the percentage of delinquent, rents for various properties, but kind of what's the feedback you're getting from your, member owners?
I think it's definitely a risk assessment that each owner has to take. What is the likelihood that you would be able to collect rent in the future at some point versus is this going to be sufficient to recover some of the balance and not have to pursue a future collection action at some point in the future? And so I think there's just really a risk analysis there. And it really depends also on what are the additional protections that the local jurisdictions are mandating in order to accept that rent, and whether or not that's appropriate for that particular tenancy, or whether or not the risk of allowing them to continue in a non-payment of rent situation is better to potentially have the opportunity to remove them in the future if they're posing an issue within the community.
And now, is your group pushing any other kind of options, a tax credit, things like that from a benefit, to kind of offset some of the cost that's been, the burden that's been put on property owners?
So we've definitely proposed a couple amendments on certain bills that would provide tax breaks and utility fee breaks where tenants are not paying their rent. There's also a bill in the House Bill 1035, which would provide a property tax exemption where the landlord agreed to hold rents or keep rents affordable in properties that are 25 years old and older. Typically, those are the more affordable properties, and they would have lower rents. And so there would be some conditions placed on the property owner in exchange for receiving a property tax break. So that's moving through the legislature. It's supported by the King County Assessor as a tool in the toolbox to preserve some affordable housing and provide some COVID relief. And we're continuing to follow that and support that.
So let's maybe jump into some of these bills that are in play in Washington in terms of some of the stuff that's going to affect housing. I mean, you just brought that one up with a property tax limitation or reduction with some agreement for affordability component. How long is that agreement? I mean, what are they proposing? Is it a certain set of Is it by year? Is it a deed restriction for a length of time?
I want to say that it's a 6 or 7 year exemption, but I'm not. I don't have it on the kind of tip of the brain here.
But it's not we've had one down here. They were talking like a 99-year deed restriction on affordability, and trying to educate that's such a long period, it just doesn't work from a lending standpoint. But again, it's been an education process for some of the legislatures on how the housing market works in terms of getting things developed, naturally occurring affordable housing. How do you maintain that, and what do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely a shorter term property tax exemption. One of the major differences between Washington and Oregon is that Washington doesn't have an income tax. And so we are so heavily reliant on property taxes and sales taxes to fund basic government functions that it does provide some heartburn when they're giving tax breaks to folks because that really just shifts the burden to homeowners or to others in the community to continue to support that. The needs of the state.
Yeah, there's a Senate bill here that's pushing for, because again, we have income tax, where you'd get an Oregon income tax credit for offsetting what is owed by the tenants, clear the slate for the tenant. You'd get an income tax credit for a portion of what's owed, and that'd be a way to, again, you're not getting appropriations, it's future money down the road that the state doesn't, but it maybe alleviates some of that, the funding issues, which I think all the states are going to have a concern about here moving forward, post-COVID, I guess we're coming out of COVID, hopefully, with their state revenues, so.
Definitely.
So what other Senate bills or House bills are, kind of your top of the mind that you're following as an organization and, really monitoring through?
Yeah, we just passed the first major cutoff this week. On Monday was the first policy cutoff. So any policy that would be considered alive still needed to move out of its first policy committee by Monday. So that was the first big deadline for us to really understand what policies are alive and what policies are dead.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with us, Brett. We'll, in part 2, we'll talk about some of these specific bills that are coming up as well. And thank you again for joining us on HFO-TV. We'll see you next time.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.